My brother called me the family failure. Then he stole my inheritance. He never expected me to read the fine print. Have you ever sat in a room full of your own family and realized every single one of them had already decided who you were? I have. To them, I was the brother who never made it, the one who fixed old machinery in a tiny repair shop, while my older brother wore expensive suits and gave interviews about his booming real estate business. When our father died, I thought losing him would be the hardest thing I'd ever go through. I was wrong. Because at the reading of his will, my own brother stood in front of everyone, smiled, and took away the last thing I thought I had left, my dignity. He handed me a rusty old toolbox and said, "Dad wanted you to have this. The real asset should go to someone who actually achieved something." The entire room laughed. I picked up that old steel box, thanked him, and walked out without saying a single angry word. What nobody knew, not my brother, not my relatives, not even the lawyer sitting at that table, was that there was one folded piece of paper hidden beneath the false bottom of that toolbox. And within 90 days, everything my brother believed he owned belonged to me. The funeral had been on a Thursday. My father, Walter Mercer, had spent 42 years running a small machine and fabrication workshop on the edge of our hometown. He wasn't rich by billionaire standards, but he had built a comfortable life with his own hands. Growing up, my brother Daniel hated that workshop. He hated the grease, the noise, the long hours. I loved every minute of it. By the time I was 12, Dad was teaching me how to rebuild carburetors and weld cracked steel. By 16, I could disassemble an engine faster than most grown mechanics. Daniel used to stand in the doorway wearing clean clothes, laughing at us. "You two smell like a junkyard," he'd say. Dad would just smile. "Funny thing about junkyards, son. That's where people throw away things they don't understand." I didn't appreciate those words back then. I would. Years later, Daniel left town for college. He earned a business degree, got into property development during a housing boom, and made more money than anyone in our family had ever seen. Every holiday dinner became the same conversation. "How's the little garage doing, Ethan? Still changing oil for a living? You should let Daniel teach you about investing." I never argued. I owned a modest repair shop. I had a small apartment above it. I paid my bills. I slept well at night. That was enough for me. But to my relatives, it wasn't enough to simply succeed. They needed someone to compare themselves against, and somehow I became that person. When Dad got sick, everything changed. The doctors called it a rare blood disorder. 1 month, he was working beside me in the shop. 3 months later, he could barely climb the porch steps. Daniel visited exactly twice. The first time, he arrived in a luxury SUV, stayed for 20 minutes, and spent most of that time on his phone. The second time, he brought a photographer. I'm not joking. A photographer followed him around the hospital while he staged pictures holding Dad's hand for social media. "Family is everything," he posted. I don't think he realized I could see the timestamp. The picture was uploaded before he even left the parking lot. Meanwhile, I was the one changing dressings, driving Dad to appointments, cooking his meals, and sleeping in a chair beside his hospital bed. Not because I expected anything, because he was my father. A week before he died, he asked me to bring him his old workshop toolbox. It was scratched, dented, and covered in faded stickers from companies that no longer existed. He ran his hand across the lid and smiled. "Still got it?" "Of course." "Good." He looked at me for a long moment. "People don't always value the right things, Ethan." I thought he was talking about family. I had no idea he meant something else. The will reading took place 5 days after the funeral. There were 11 people in the conference room. Daniel and his wife, Melissa, my 2 aunts, 3 cousins, our father's longtime attorney, Mr. Holloway, and a handful of relatives who hadn't visited Dad once during his illness, but somehow found time to show up for the paperwork. The lawyer cleared his throat. Walter Mercer left specific gifts to several family members. The old hunting rifles went to a cousin. Grandma's jewelry went to Aunt Linda. Then came the big one. The Mercer family home, investment accounts, business holdings, and all remaining financial assets are to be transferred to Daniel Mercer. I heard someone whistle softly. Melissa reached over and squeezed Daniel's hand. Then Mr. Holloway looked down again. To my younger son, Ethan Mercer, I leave my personal workshop toolbox and all tools currently stored inside it. The room was silent for exactly 1 second. Then Daniel laughed. Not a little laugh. The kind of laugh someone makes when they think they've completely beaten you. Well, he said, standing up, I guess Dad knew who the handyman was. A couple of relatives chuckled. Melissa looked at me with fake sympathy. Honestly, Ethan, it kind of suits you. Then Daniel walked over to a side table where the old toolbox had been placed. He picked it up with 2 fingers like it was covered in mud. Here you go, little brother. He handed it to me. Dad wanted you to have this. The real assets belong to people who actually achieved something. I looked around the room. Nobody spoke. Nobody defended me. Some looked uncomfortable. Most looked amused. And suddenly, I understood something. They had all already decided what my value was. The dependable one. The helpful one. The one who could be counted on to do the hard work while somebody else collected the reward. I took the toolbox. I looked Daniel in the eyes, and I smiled. Thanks, I said quietly. I appreciate it. Then I walked out. Behind me, I could hear someone laughing again. That night, I carried the toolbox upstairs to my apartment over the repair shop. I set it on my kitchen table and just stared at it. The thing weighed a ton. Dad had owned it for nearly 40 years. I opened the lid. Inside were dozens of old wrenches, sockets, measuring tools, and screwdrivers, each one carefully organized exactly the way he liked them. The smell hit me immediately. Motor oil, old leather, metal dust. For a second, it felt like he was standing right there. I sat down and cried. Not because I wanted the money. Not because I cared about the house. But because I'd spent the last year taking care of my father, and somehow I had still ended up feeling like I had disappointed him. After a while, I started taking the tools out one by one. I wiped each one clean before placing it on the table. Halfway through, I noticed something strange. The bottom of the toolbox looked uneven. Dad had built custom compartments into almost everything he owned. I tapped the steel floor with my knuckle. One side sounded hollow. I frowned. There was a tiny screw hidden behind an old sticker. I'd never seen it before. I grabbed a screwdriver and carefully removed it. The metal panel lifted just enough for my fingers to slide underneath. My heartbeat started to speed up. Beneath the false bottom was a sealed brown envelope. Across the front, in my father's handwriting, were 4 words. For Ethan. Alone. My hands were shaking as I opened it. Inside was a folded letter, and beneath the letter was a thick packet of legal documents. I unfolded the note first. Ethan, if you're reading this, then things happened exactly the way I thought they would. I stopped. I read that sentence again. Your brother always loved what money could buy. You always loved what money could build. I couldn't stop the family from judging success by the size of a bank account, but I could make sure the future of what I spent my life creating ended up in the right hands. I felt my throat tighten. There was one final paragraph. Everything you need to understand is in the documents underneath this letter. Don't trust assumptions. Read every page. And remember what I always told you. The most valuable part of any machine is the piece nobody thinks to look at. I carefully set the letter down. Then I picked up the legal packet. The first page looked like an ownership agreement. The second page was stranger. By the third page, I was reading so quickly I almost missed it. I stood up so fast my chair crashed backward onto the floor. "No way," I whispered. No way. Because according to the paperwork in my hands, my father hadn't actually owned the workshop business. At least, not personally. 22 years earlier, he'd quietly transferred it into a family trust. A trust nobody in the family had ever mentioned. A trust whose primary beneficiary wasn't Daniel. It was me. And hidden deep inside the trust agreement was one sentence that would change everything. The Mercer family home, all adjacent land, and any commercial properties purchased using profits generated by Mercer Industrial Fabrication were legally attached to the trust's controlling interest. I felt the blood drain from my face. Daniel thought he had inherited everything, but if these papers were real, he hadn't inherited the business at all. He had inherited only my father's personal estate. The actual engine that had paid for almost every major purchase our family had ever made belonged to the trust. And according to the final page, I was the sole acting trustee. I looked down at the final line. There, beside my father's signature and the attorney's seal, was a date. 22 years ago. Then I noticed something else. The witness signature. I knew that name. I had seen it only a few hours earlier. Mr. Holloway. The same lawyer who had sat across from me at the will reading and never said a single word. The next morning, I locked the repair shop early. I put the documents back into the envelope, slid it into my backpack, and drove straight to Mr. Holloway's office. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even confused. I wanted one thing, the truth. And I had a feeling that before this day was over, my brother's perfect little victory was about to become the biggest mistake of his life. The drive to Mr. Holloway's office felt longer than it really was. I must have gone over those papers 100 times in my head. A trust, a controlling interest, commercial properties tied to the business. None of it made sense. If those documents were legitimate, then why had the lawyer sat there in silence while Daniel practically celebrated taking everything? I parked outside the old brick building where Mr. Holloway had worked for as long as I could remember. His receptionist looked up and smiled politely. "Mr. Mercer?" He said if you came by, I should send you right in. I froze. If you came by? She simply nodded. He was expecting you. Mr. Holloway was standing beside the window when I entered. He was in his 70s now, with silver hair and glasses balanced low on his nose. He didn't offer me a seat immediately. Instead, his eyes drifted to the worn brown envelope under my arm. A small smile crossed his face. "You found it." I placed the envelope on his desk. "You knew." I did. My jaw tightened. "You sat there yesterday while my brother humiliated me in front of everyone." Mr. Holloway lowered his head. "I know." "And you didn't say a word." He finally motioned for me to sit. "Because your father made me promise I wouldn't." I stared at him. "What?" He opened a locked drawer and removed a thin file. 3 years ago, when Walter realized his health was failing, he came to me and updated the trust instructions. He slid a document across the desk. At the bottom was my father's signature. I recognized it instantly. He told me that after he passed, the will would be read exactly as written. The trust documents would not be mentioned unless... He paused. "Unless you personally found the letter." I looked at him in disbelief. So this was some kind of test? Mr. Holloway shook his head. No, it was protection. He leaned back in his chair. Your father loved both of his sons, but he understood you very differently. I didn't say anything. He knew Daniel believed success came from appearances. Expensive cars, big houses, impressive titles. The old lawyer looked directly at me. But he also knew you never cared about any of that. You cared about the work itself. He folded his hands. Walter was terrified that if he openly left the business to you, the family would pressure you into giving Daniel half of it out of guilt. I let out a slow breath. That actually sounds like them. Mr. Holloway gave a quiet, knowing nod. So he built a different plan, one that could only work if you trusted yourself enough to walk away. I thought back to the conference room, to Daniel's laugh, to everyone watching me carry out that old toolbox. Dad knew. He knew exactly how they would react, and somehow, he also knew how I would. There's something else you need to understand, Mr. Holloway said. He opened the file and turned it toward me. The trust owned more than the old workshop. Over the years, every major investment my father had made had been purchased through Mercer Industrial Fabrication. The land under the family home, a warehouse on the industrial side of town, a commercial storage building, even several rental properties. I felt my head spinning. This can't be right. It is. But the will says Daniel inherited the family home. He inherited your father's personal ownership interest, the lawyer replied calmly. But the underlying property is held by the trust. Legally, he has the right to live there, but he cannot sell it, refinance it, or use it as collateral without the trustee's approval. I looked at him. And the trustee is... He gave me a tired smile. You, Ethan. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I just felt sad. Dad had spent years planning around the possibility that his own family would value money more than loyalty. And the worst part? He had been right. For the next 2 weeks, I told no one. I opened the workshop every morning. I repaired tractors, lawnmowers, and old pickup trucks. I drank coffee from the same chipped mug Dad had used for years. Meanwhile, social media was flooded with pictures from Daniel. He posted photos standing on the front porch of the family house. Honored to continue Dad's legacy. A week later, he posted another one. Big changes coming. Excited for the future. The comments were full of congratulations. People kept telling him how proud Walter would have been. I almost replied once. I almost typed, "You should probably read the paperwork first." But I didn't, because Dad had taught me something a long time ago. You never interrupt someone while they're making a mistake. 3 weeks after the funeral, I got a phone call. It was my cousin, Rachel. She almost never called me. "Ethan," she said nervously, "I thought you should know. Daniel's planning to redevelop the old workshop." I stopped what I was doing. "What do you mean?" "He had investors over today. They were talking about bulldozing it and building luxury townhouses." For a second, I couldn't speak. The workshop, the place my father had spent his entire life building, the place where I learned to weld, the place where every scar on my hands came from. Daniel wanted to tear it down. I thanked Rachel and hung up. Then I called Mr. Holloway. His response was immediate. "Has he signed anything yet?" "I don't know." "Find out." I didn't have to wait long. The following Friday, a black SUV pulled up outside my repair shop. Daniel stepped out wearing a tailored navy suit and sunglasses. Melissa climbed out behind him. She looked around at the old building and wrinkled her nose. Daniel smiled. "Little brother." I wiped my hands with a shop rag. "What do you want?" He looked around dramatically. "I actually came to help you." "Help me?" "Come on, Ethan. Be realistic. This place is falling apart." He gestured toward the shop. I'm putting together a redevelopment project. Investors, new housing, nice restaurants. The whole area will be transformed. I folded my arms. And? And I'd hate for you to be left behind. Melissa stepped forward holding a folder. Daniel continued. If you sign this agreement, I'll give you $100,000 for the workshop. Cash. I didn't even look at the papers. You think I own the workshop? He frowned. Of course you do. Dad left you the tools. This old building's basically worthless anyway. I couldn't help it. I laughed. Not loudly, just enough to make him uncomfortable. Daniel's smile faded. What's so funny? I looked him right in the eyes. You really haven't read the paperwork, have you? For the first time since the funeral, I saw uncertainty flicker across his face. The uncertainty didn't last. 3 days later, the town's annual Chamber of Commerce Gala arrived. Daniel loved events like that. Business owners, local politicians, photographers, people to impress. I almost didn't go. Then Mr. Holloway called. I think you should attend. Why? Because, he said quietly, I have a feeling your brother's about to make a very expensive announcement. The ballroom was packed. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Waiters moved between tables carrying trays of champagne. I stood near the back, wearing the only suit I owned. A couple of relatives noticed me. One aunt whispered to another. I heard the words, "Still running that little garage." I ignored them. At exactly 8 o'clock, Daniel stepped onto the stage. He tapped the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here. Polite applause filled the room. He smiled confidently. As many of you know, my late father believed in investing in this community. He clicked a remote. A giant screen behind him lit up. An artist's rendering appeared. The old Mercer workshop had been replaced by sleek apartment buildings and trendy cafes. Gasps and applause echoed around the room. Daniel spread his arms. I'm proud to announce the Mercer Heights redevelopment project. More applause. He looked directly at me. And I'd especially like to thank my little brother Ethan for agreeing to let go of the past and make room for progress. Every head in the room turned toward me. I slowly stood up. I never agreed to that. The room went silent. Daniel forced a laugh. Oh, Ethan, don't do this here. I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out a folded document, and held it up. Daniel, before you promise investors something you don't own, I looked around the room. Maybe you should explain to everyone who actually controls Mercer Industrial Fabrication. The smile vanished from his face. A man at the front table stood up. I recognized him from one of Daniel's social media pictures, one of the investors. What is he talking about? Daniel swallowed. Nothing. He's confused. I shook my head. No. Then I placed the trust agreement on the nearest table. Mr. Holloway, who had quietly entered the ballroom 10 minutes earlier, walked over and stood beside me. He adjusted his glasses. As legal counsel for the Mercer Family Trust, he announced calmly, I can confirm that Mr. Ethan Mercer is the sole acting trustee and controlling authority over all trust-owned business assets. The investor's face went pale. I'm sorry, did you say all assets? Mr. Holloway nodded. That includes the workshop property, the warehouse, the commercial storage buildings, and any redevelopment rights attached to those holdings. The ballroom exploded into whispers. Daniel looked at the lawyer. You can't be serious. Oh, Mr. Holloway replied. I'm entirely serious. Melissa grabbed Daniel's arm. You told me you owned all of it. I do, he shouted. Then he stopped, because deep down, he realized he wasn't sure anymore. One investor walked directly up to Daniel. You signed a preliminary financing agreement with us last week. Another joined him. And you used the warehouse as collateral. A third spoke up. You assured us there were no ownership disputes. Daniel's face had gone completely white. He looked at me. then at Mr. Holloway, then back at the documents. His confidence was gone. He looked like a man realizing, in real time, that the ground beneath his feet had disappeared. He whispered, almost to himself, "Dad wouldn't do this." I took a slow breath. "No, Daniel." I looked him in the eyes. He absolutely would. Because he wasn't punishing you. He was protecting what he spent his life building. The gala ended early. Within 48 hours, the investors had withdrawn. The redevelopment deal collapsed. Banks began asking questions about paperwork Daniel had already filed. And then one final truth came out. Trying to keep up appearances, Daniel had quietly taken out several personal loans after Dad's funeral. He had expected to repay them once the redevelopment project went through. Instead, he was left holding debts he couldn't cover. The expensive cars disappeared first, then the vacation house, then the luxury SUV. People in town started talking. Funny how quickly admiration turns into gossip. About a month later, there was a knock at my apartment door above the repair shop. When I opened it, Daniel was standing there, alone. He looked older, tired. The confidence was gone. "I just want to talk." I let him in. He looked around the apartment. Nothing had changed. The old couch, the tiny kitchen, Dad's toolbox sitting on a shelf. He noticed it immediately. "You found it, didn't you?" I nodded. He sat down heavily. "I thought Dad hated me." I shook my head. "He didn't." "Then why?" I was quiet for a moment. Then I reached over and handed him the letter, the one Dad had written to me. Daniel read it silently. Halfway through, his eyes filled with tears. There was one sentence he kept reading over and over. "I hope one day my sons understand that building a life is more important than inheriting one." Daniel put the letter down. "I spent my whole life trying to prove I was successful." I gave a small, sad smile. "I know." He looked around the room. "And you never cared." I looked at my hands, the scars, the burns, the calluses from years in the workshop. I cared about different things. A few months later, I made a decision that surprised everyone. I didn't sell the workshop. I restored it. I hired 2 apprentices from the local trade school. We expanded the fabrication side of the business. The old warehouse became a community training center for young mechanics and welders. Above the front entrance, I hung a simple wooden sign, "Walter Mercer Works." No fancy logo, no corporate slogan, just Dad's name. Daniel came by on opening day. He stood quietly in the corner while people toured the building. When everyone had left, he walked over. "I don't expect forgiveness." I nodded. "Good." A weak smile crossed his face. I figured. Then I reached into my pocket and handed him a small brass key. He looked at it. "What's this?" "The side entrance." He frowned. "For what?" "In case you ever want to come by and actually learn how to use those tools Dad left behind." For the first time in years, my brother laughed. A real laugh. Not the arrogant one I'd grown up hearing, just a tired, honest laugh. People still ask me sometimes if I think my father was unfair, if he should have divided everything equally. Maybe, maybe not. But I don't think he ever wanted his legacy to be money. I think he wanted it to be character. One son inherited a fortune he thought would solve every problem. The other inherited an old, rusty toolbox. Turns out, the most valuable thing my father ever built wasn't the workshop. It wasn't the land. It wasn't the trust. It was the lesson hidden beneath a false bottom that nobody else ever thought to check. Because in the end, life works a lot like an old machine. The shiny parts catch everyone's attention. But the piece that truly holds everything together is usually the one nobody notices until it's gone. And if you've ever been the person your family underestimated, if you've ever been laughed at because your path looked different, just remember, sometimes the quiet ones aren't losing. They're simply reading the fine print.